kids. I sure miss seeing you all. I hope you're having a great summer. I hope you are biking and swimming and doing all kinds of fun stuff with your friends and your family. And I hope that I get to see you soon. And I hope that you have a really great summer. Today's lesson is from the Bible. And the Bible, as we know, with the Old Testament and the New Testament, is a big story. It's a big story. It's God's story. So when we are reading the Bible, we are reading a story that God has given us to read and study and learn about Him. So the whole Bible is a story. And we are reading from a book called The Biggest Story by DeYoung. And you have already heard about Adam and Eve, and you've heard about the Tower of Babel, and you've heard about Noah, how all these people made mistakes because we are human and we are sinful. And even though we might try hard not to sin, we still do. But God has a plan. It's part of His big story to save His people. So I want you to remember the part of the story that we heard last week where Noah did lots of great things. He obeyed God with the animals and the ark and building it, and God saved his family, and it was wonderful. And at the end of that story, there was something that God sent to show a promise. What was that thing? Think carefully. What did God send as a promise that He would never, ever, 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 ever flood the earth, the whole earth again? If you were thinking rainbow, you are right. The rainbow in the story is a reminder to us. When we see a rainbow in the sky, what can we remember? What is the sign for? It's a sign that God keeps His promises. Have we ever had another flood that covers the whole planet of Earth? No. We've had floods in different parts of the world, but not over the whole Earth, right? So that shows us that God is a promise keeper. When He makes a promise, He keeps His promise. And that is so exciting. So today's story is about another promise that God makes to Abraham. And let's see if God is still going to keep all those promises that He makes. Not too long after the whole tower business, God called a man named Abraham to leave his home and go to a new country. Actually, his name was Abram at this point, but everyone remembers him as Abraham. When God called Abraham, He made a lot of big promises. He promised to bless Abraham and to bless everyone who blessed Abraham. He promised to curse everyone who cursed Abraham. He promised Abraham a land and a child. God promised that Abraham would be the father of a great nation and that all nations would be blessed through him. Pretty much all the blessings that God wanted to give Adam and Eve, He promised to Abraham. And the best part? This time, God was going to do everything Himself to make sure Abraham got his blessing. You might think that God wanted to bless Abraham because he was such a swell guy. But Abraham didn't know God at all when God called him. And even after he got the call and all these promises, Abraham could still be a liar and a bit of a scaredy cat. Abraham's life had a lot of ups and downs, but he had two things going for him. The only two things, it turns out, that really matter. God's promises to bless him and Abraham's belief in God's promise. That's all Abraham had, which was a good deal because it was all he needed. At times, it looked as if God wasn't going to keep his promises to Abraham. For one thing, it was about 100 years before Abraham and his wife Sarah, who used to be called Sarai, had a baby named Isaac, who thankfully was always called Isaac. And then, when the baby grew into a boy, God told Abraham to kill him. That must have seemed like a not so funny way to make a great nation out of Abraham. But Abraham listened to God anyway. And at the last second, God gave Abraham a ram to sacrifice instead of his beloved son. It was God's way of saying, I'll take care of the rescuing. Just trust me. Eventually, Isaac grew up, got married, and had some kids of his own. Twins, to be exact, Esau and Jacob. God picked Jacob to get the blessing, even though he was the younger brother and wasn't supposed to get the blessing. But God is God, so he gets to pick. Jacob had 12 sons, and this time it was the fourth son, Judah, who wound up with the best blessing. Jacob told Judah that a lion of a leader would come from his family. Great blessings, but not so great people. Isaac was sort of a weakling, and Jacob was a selfish trickster. And Judah did such dumb stuff. We don't even want to talk about it. And yet, again and again, God kept his promises all the same. He blessed the whole lot of them despite themselves. Maybe the snake crusher would still come from the gnarled branches of the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob family tree. So if God has always kept his promises in the past for thousands of years, can we trust God to keep his promise that he will never, ever leave us? That he will always love us? Yes. Matthew 28:20 says, "And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." At the end of the age, in the future, we don't know when, but it's one day, God has prepared a wonderful, beautiful place in heaven. He will one day crush the head of the nasty snake, and we will be with Jesus forever and ever. God promised it, so we can be sure that he will do it.
Such a nice day today. I know, it's such a great day. I'm just gonna get in the water and swim all day. I know. Okay, you test the water. Yeah, okay, but promise, do not push me in while I'm testing the water. Promise? Okay, we promise.
Have you ever had someone promise you something and then forget about the promise and never follow through on the promise? It's really sad when that happens. At school, maybe a friend promised you could play with the special toy that they had brought to school. But at recess, that friend wouldn't let you play with them. Often, kids will say, "But you promised." People make promises all the time, and sometimes they break their promises. But God always, always keeps his promises.
Yeah, same. Test it. Okay, but promise. Do not push me in, you guys.
Okay, we promise.
Yeah, promise. You promise?
Very.
Promise, promise, promise. You know, it'd be hilarious.
What?
If we pushed her in.
Oh my gosh, no. We can't push her in.
Of course we can.
No, we promised, remember? She said promise, 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 and then we said promise.
I don't care about a promise.
So God promised Abraham that he would have a son, and that son would have children and grandchildren and great children, and the family would grow into a huge nation. They would be called Israel, and from Abraham's family, the snake crusher would be born. Who was the snake crusher? Yes, Jesus, the Lion of Judah, would come to save his people from their sins. You see, the whole big story has been planned out by God. He promised some very big promises to Abraham. Did God keep his promises? Yes, he did, because God is a promise keeper.